Joined now by Rinkwide's Jeff Paterson, our Canucks reporter, and Jeff playing to discuss here on the eve of the Canucks season, on the opening night of the NHL season. I want to start with that. I want to start with that bombshell drop by Elliot Friedman, that if Pettersson isn't sure, maybe the Vancouver Canucks are not sure. And whoa, when I hear that maybe somebody's ego is out of joint, and not necessarily realizing that this guy is the most important part, not necessarily the ego considerations. What was your reaction to the Canucks maybe not sure themselves if they want Elias here long term?
Well, I'm having trouble figuring out which part of Elias Pettersson they don't want to commit to long term, because 102 points seems like the kind of guy that you might want to hitch your wagon to. And look, I have very few doubts that Elias Pettersson is going to have another fine season. Is he going to get to 102? Maybe not. I think the style that Rick Tocchet wants this team to deploy, we saw in the preseason that there wasn't a ton of offense. Pettersson himself didn't have a great preseason. He scored the one goal against the Edmonton Oilers. But, it just comes back to me that it felt like on a lot of levels, the temperature and the volume around this team when it came to dysfunction had been lowered. And then this on the eve of the doorstep of a new season, I go back to what Jim Rutherford said about everything going right for the hockey club. And, Pettersson himself talked about not wanting the contract to be a distraction. This wasn't Elias Pettersson speaking. This was the voice on the other side of the table. So, again, they can all say they don't want it to be a distraction. And here this is already before the puck has dropped on game one, is this cloud of uncertainty that continues to hover over this player, his future here, and in turn, the hockey club as a whole. So it's not what the Vancouver Canucks needed, but it does make you think, do they have reservations about Elias Pettersson? I mean, obviously, there's a dollar figure that makes it untenable, I suppose. But boy, if he backs up 102 points with anything close to that, I think he can just stand there with a blank check and say, sign it, or maybe it's time to move elsewhere to give me a chance to play for another organization.
I'm not meaning to refute Elliot Friedman, because I don't even think it was necessarily a report. I think it was him sort of spitballing to some degree. But I'm just going to say, guys, I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe that the Canucks are not committed to Elias Pettersson. I don't believe that the Canucks don't believe in Elias Pettersson. And do they think that his agent's asking for too much right now? That's very possible, but that happens in every negotiation. I don't think this speaks to the long-term interest of the Canucks in Elias Pettersson at all. I don't believe that.
Well, again, it shouldn't. And,
no.
It caught me off guard like everybody else. And I don't think Elliot's making this stuff up. I wouldn't suggest that for a second. So I do think that, he's as informed as anybody that covers this league, and that information came from somewhere. I
think it came from the owner, guys. I think that's his source with the team. I think Francesco has long talked to Elliot, and I think Francesco's ego's out of joint that Elias Pettersson is unsigned on the eve of the season and needs more time to look at this Canucks franchise and see if they're going in the right direction. I also think it's quite right, and Frank Saravelli has told us this in the past, that the Canucks have not yet gotten to the number figure that will get Elias Pettersson to resign. And guys, this is all happening in a context of Rasmus Dahlin resigning in Buffalo, and of course the Winnipeg Jets getting Connor Hellebuck and Mark Scheifele resigned. And you can argue with those contracts and maybe say they're too much, and Hellebuck and Scheifele are too old. But the bottom line is other teams are getting their business done and locking their stars up on the eve of the season, while the Vancouver Canucks twiddle their fingers and hope Elias signs at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, there's, again, this uncertainty that we all talked about all summer and people didn't want to hear about because it was the offseason and they had time on their side. But now we have arrived at the start of the season. And so if Elias Pettersson gets off to a slow start, it's human nature that this would be in the back of his mind somewhere about the future, the contract, the dollar amounts. He's already made a ton of dough, but he is setting himself up for the rest of his life, his family's life. This is big time stuff. And you can imagine if this is weighing on him in any way. And so his start is tied directly to this team start. We know the importance thereof for the Vancouver Canucks. So the people that want this to be swept under the rug, they have to give their head a shake. They're the ones that aren't living in the reality that this kind of stuff does impact players at the highest level. And you're right, other teams were able to get their business done before the season started. And for the Vancouver Canucks, this is going to be an ongoing saga that they had an opportunity to nip in the bud, but have elected not to.
Before we leave this, do you believe that they will honestly wait till the end of the season, or would you be surprised at all if, November 15th, a contract gets signed, January 11th, a contract gets signed? Do you think they're going to live by that?
I won't be shocked if a deal comes out of the blue, but at the same time, there are two sides to this negotiation, and Pettersson's made it pretty clear that he wants to take a wait and see approach. Obviously, he's a huge part of the start and the overall success of the season. But again, if things go sideways, and we saw quickly last year how it can, slip out of control, and really the year before that, the 25-game mark where they had to undergo the entire house cleaning, I do think that Elias Pettersson is in a bit of a wait-and-see mode here, but we also know that Patrick Allvin seems to like the element of surprise. The JT Miller contract came out of nowhere. Brock Besser heading into, was it the Easter long weekend or whenever they got that deal done? The Horvat deal, we all kind of thought we could let our guard down for the All-Star break, and boom, on the Monday, Bo Horvat's no longer a member of the Vancouver Canucks. So the Canucks seem to like to operate in that regard. If a Pettersson deal materialized, I find it hard to believe that somebody wouldn't catch wind of it somewhere along the way. But again, I do think that there's some history with this management group of trying their best to keep the negotiations, keep a lid on them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would behoove them. We know what the salary cap is going to be roughly next year. They certainly have the space, finally, to be able to offer the massive deal, and I think it's going to take one to get them signed. So we'll see where this goes during the season. But on the eve of the season, some not great signs with regards to Elias Pettersson. Also not great signs with regards to Ilya Mikheyev, because he's not ready to go. I'm sure you saw Dan Milstein's tweet on last night, Jeff. What do you make of this Mikheyev situation, and when do you think he might be available to play for the Canucks, watching him at practice?
Yeah, I wish Milstein had cleared up a little more. The tweet started with, I want to clear things up, and then it really didn't add an awful lot other than everybody heals at their own rate, but I think we already knew that. Look, I have watched Ilya Mikheyev now for the better part of a couple of weeks. To the eye, in straight lines, he looks like he's up to speed. He joked on Sunday that he thinks he's faster now, that he's been mechanically healed, the bionic man, if you will. But it's baby steps. They just cleared him to start engaging in some contact at practice over the weekend and said that he's not going to be ready. The word around the rink was a couple of weeks still for Mikheyev. So they started home against the Oilers, then they're out on the road for 5. Could he join them at some point of the road trip? That would take them a couple of weeks into the season. Are you better served just to let him stay behind and rehab here with the training staff and hope that he can get up and running when they come off the road? Whatever the case, I mean, it's disappointing. It's got to be disappointing for him. It's got to be disappointing for the hockey club. Again, the questions remain about why the surgery was delayed until early February, when a lot of people with more intricate knowledge of the procedure and the recovery times than I have said, this is going to be at least 9 months. And for a lot of guys, it's a full calendar year before they're feeling good and feeling right. And, speed is his meal ticket. So, it's frustrating and disappointing, I'm sure, for a lot of people involved. But the bottom line is the Canucks are without one of their top 6 wingers. And we saw in the preseason that goals were hard to come by. Not that I'm expecting huge numbers from Ilya Mikheyev, but I do think if he was able to stay healthy, and that's been the thing, guys. I mean, he's never played more than 54 games in an NHL season in his career. So it is hard to project what to expect. But boy, you saw the auditions through preseason for a winger to play with Pettersson and Kuzmenko, and nobody grabbed the brass ring. So certainly there's a spot waiting there. If Ilya Mikheyev was able to play a full season there, I'd like to think that he could be 20 to 25 goals for the Vancouver Canucks, plus add utility elsewhere. But they're going to have to start without him. And a team that's not particularly quick to begin with is now without one of its fastest players, who isn't 100%.
Yeah. And if you think not getting Pettersson signed goes on the minus sheet of this management group's ledger, this one is absolutely a mistake now, because you needed to have him ready for the start of this season and letting him play as long as they did on that partially torn ACL last year. Still baffles me. Still don't know how and why that conclusion got reached, because it was a poor one.
Jeff, what about all the other twos and fros there over the weekend? Do we give the team credit for getting the puzzle pieces almost perfectly there to get the not the LTIR, to get the overage right here for the salary cap, or do we think that this is something that, you know, underlines the cap issues that this team has, and that they've filled up the bank account too much after getting that space from Oliver Ekman-Larsson?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was June, and here we are in October, and all of that money has evaporated to the point where they did have to do some salary cap gymnastics to set their opening, and it's their season opening roster. Again, it's sort of semantics here, but because they don't play till Wednesday, the players that were on that roster on Monday afternoon at the league deadline, there could be some changes when the Canucks hit the ice against the Oilers. So let's wait and see on that one. But the fact that they had to start with a 22-man roster and not the full complement of players, again, tells you just how up against the cap that this team continues to operate, despite its stated objective of freeing up salary cap space, which we know isn't easy to do. But we've heard it an awful lot, and yet there haven't been steps in that direction. And then over the weekend, they had another contract in Sam Lafferty. And I'll be curious to see where Lafferty slots in this lineup for the Vancouver Canucks. We know how much Rick Tocchet likes PDG and what he's brought to the second line. I just mentioned an opening on the can you imagine if Sam Lafferty was acquired and is plugged in as a right winger for Elias Pettersson and Andrei Kuzmenko, because they like bite and size and physical play and all that kind of stuff. So we'll see where Lafferty ultimately slots into all of this. But again, they operate like they are right there knocking on the door of contending, and yet we know that they haven't been a playoff team for 3 years, and through it all, they haven't been able to clear up salary cap space. They still have all these players and all these wingers that we question, whether it's Brock Besser or Connor Garland or Anthony Beauvillier. We talked about Mikheyev. What's he? And, in all of this mix. And so there are a ton of question marks. Will one of those guys that I just mentioned, will somebody rise up and finally have the kind of offensive season that we've been talking about for a while now? Will Besser get to 30? Can Garland get to 20 for the first time in a Vancouver Canuck uniform? I don't know what to make of Beauvillier, and he was awfully quiet in the preseason, and obviously a contract year for him. So, right up against the cap, going with one under the limit. Mikheyev goes on IR. Tucker Poolman, to the surprise of nobody, is on long-term and will stay there and is probably done as a National Hockey Leaguer. But ultimately, what their lineup looks like for Wednesday against the Edmonton Oilers, I think we're going to have to take a little bit of a wait-and-see approach there.
Yeah, and just so people know, Podkolzin was called up, as Hart Levine of Puckpedia pointed out, because he could get them $28,000 away from maximizing the LTIR capture on Poolman. So I would suspect you were going to see Podkolzin sent back down, because I believe the coach was pretty emphatic with regards to what Podkolzin needs. So just before anyone gets excited.
No, but I think it's instructive too, though, that the way this all worked, it looks like Nils Höglander is going to be in the opening night lineup for the Vancouver Canucks. And this is a guy that had, let's be honest, a pretty underwhelming preseason. And we talked about Podkolzin as well. Both of those guys, and paperwork, at least, they're on that season opening roster. I'm with you about Podkolzin. They've said that they want him to be down in Abbotsford and just to stay down there, and he wasn't called up for the preseason game out in Abbotsford last week, and Rick Tocchet sort of elaborated on all of that. But the numbers fit, and it is, no question, it's a puzzle piece to try to get as close as you can to that 83.5, and they didn't get as close as they did last year. Remember they won the salary cap cup last year.
Yes.
When I think it was 0. I think they hit it on the number this year, a couple of
thousand. They'll unfurl the banner tomorrow
Yes.
night, right?
Yes.
I hope they do that. The other thing to keep in mind is they've obviously acquired another body in Sam Lafferty. But at the same time, guys, I do think guys like Nils Åman played their way off this roster. I'll be surprised if Åman is one of the guys that gets recalled back up for the opening night lineup. That's the 5% chance I give to Podkolzin being in the opening night lineup. Is I think other guys have played their way off this lineup as well here, at least to start the season.
No, look, we can go through this long list of Höglander and Podkolzin. Atu Ratu, there were higher hopes for him to at least rise up and make some kind of statement. Studnicka skated around really fast, but there was ultimately no takeaway for him. He's not on this team. And Nils Åman, the only thing that might get him on back is his size, and Rick Tocchet seems to value his big forwards. he's got some versatility. He played center last year. He was shifted to the wing through most of the preseason. But if there's any question about Teddy Blueger and his readiness after, skipping practice on Sunday and the bruised foot the other night, Amon at least gives the Canucks one more guy that has some NHL center ice experience, but Sam Lafferty does as well. And I guess Lafferty could get plugged in a pinch if that's the direction that they want to go. But I'm fully expecting that Vasily Podkolzin is going to start the season down in Abbotsford. We'll see if he spends the season down in Abbotsford or if something finally clicks for him and he is able to play his way back to the National Hockey League.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Oman. If Blueger can't go with Höglander in and Podkolzin on the sidelines, and I also think Hirose if Briesbach can't go, but we'll see what they do here over the next 48 hours. Okay, Jeff, it's that time of year. We've come to predictions here with the Vancouver Canucks. We got 5 categories here: points, predicted finish, leading scorer, MVP, and a bold prediction, sir. Let's start with points. How many points do you have? 83 last year. How many for the Canucks this year?
I think they're a better team, and I think that'll be reflected in the standings. Is it going to be enough to get them above the playoff bar? I'll answer that in a sec, but I think that they will be in the 89 to 91 range. So, spoiler alert, I don't have them making the playoffs.
Oh, so what's that? Is that 6th in the Pacific for you?
Yeah, I think Edmonton and Vegas have separated themselves. I like LA. I think the trajectory of the Kings is in the right direction. I think it's possible that Seattle could take a slight step back, but I don't think they're taking a precipitous drop, just the way that Dave Haxtell has them playing and the confidence they gained last year. Calgary's a wild card. We talked about that with the Flames in town last week. No real game breaker. Lots of really good pieces there, but it's more about the breath of fresh air around that team and what that can do for a lot of the players that were tired of Darryl and all that went on. So I think the Canucks kind of jockey with Calgary and Seattle, but in the end, I think the Canucks are better than they were last year, points-wise, but I still think that they've got work to do to certainly be a playoff team in the Pacific Division. I think they'll be in the wild card chase for a while, but in the end, will come up just a little bit short.
Leading scorer?
It's got to be Pettersson. I just don't know how, be wild if somebody like Quinn Hughes could push Elias Pettersson. And of course, health plays into all of this, but I am fully banking on Elias Pettersson picking up where he left off. Again, I don't know that he's going to get to 100 points in Rick Tocchet's lower event system, but I'm expecting another big season, a motivated, driven Elias Pettersson with that contract in the back of his mind. So I think he's your leading scorer. I'm going to say that he just kind of like the team. I think he'll get just over the 90-point mark.
Okay. Team MVP. Same guy?
No, I'll go with Demko. I think if this team is going to hold its own and somehow be there in the end, I think they're going to lean on Thatcher Demko early. I think they're going to need him down the stretch. He's going to play a bunch, and it'll be interesting to see how Rick Tocchet and Ian Clark go about finding him his nights off. He was banging on the door 2 seasons ago of being in the conversation of best goaltenders in the NHL, not maybe the truly elite. He showed that form down the stretch. I thought he had a really nice preseason. Didn't play an awful lot, but the games that he did, he looked sharp and solid. I do think this team has improved around him, and so that the workload within the games, he's not going to be stretched post to post all the time and making 5-alarm saves. I think Thatcher Demko, ultimately, if this team does have some modicum of success, it's going to be on the back of Thatcher Demko. So I think he'll be the team MVP.
Yeah, I'm with you on a lot of these. So your bold prediction, Jeff, and I sure hope it's not similar to mine or Blake's. What you got?
How about the fact that JT Miller accepts this role as a two-way legitimate matchup shutdown kind of centerman, puts the points aside and frees up Elias Pettersson to draw the more favorable matchups and allows Pettersson to do his thing. How about just a kind of, dare I say, run-of-the-mill kind of season for JT Miller, but one that has very little drama, more ups than downs, just in terms of his overall performance and contribution to the hockey club. My bold prediction then is that we don't really talk an awful lot about JT Miller this season as we have.
That's really bold.
For too much of the last 2 years.
That's a very unique, bold prediction. I did not have that one on my ledger.
No, nor did I. And yes, that one is going to be unique, I think, to Jeff. It all gets going tomorrow, and all of us will be involved with Rink Wide tomorrow with you, Jeff. So looking forward to it. Thank you for this.
All right, guys. Thank you.
This Sekeres and Price clip brought to you by Applewood Auto Group. And remember,
It's all good at Applewood.